Thank you so much, and welcome to this session where, together with these three masterminds, we will humbly save the world, right?
Yes. We hope so.
So we have a venture capitalist, former Minister of Science and Education, all in one person. That's Ahlers. We have the one and only Marianne Dahl, partner and managing director of technology in Boston Consulting Group, and former C-level at Microsoft. And the wisest of them all, of course, the professor and associate dean at Copenhagen Business School, author of countless books and scientific papers, all on corporate sustainability. Andreas, Rasche, please give the panel a hand. They're going to need it. Because we have 35 minutes and one simple task: how can we accelerate the green transition, combining smart regulation and smart investments and innovative startups? Marianne Dahl, where should we start?
Yeah, it's always important to define the starting point if you want to save the world. If we look into our own little society of Denmark, then there is two sectors that needs the most focus when it comes to sustainability. It's transportation and it's agriculture. These two sectors will in 2030 consist of 85% of the Danish CO2 emissions. So definitely where the progress since 1990, which is the base year, has been more or less zero. Actually, it has been a negative development on transportation since the amount of transportation has increased so much. And in agriculture, not a lot has happened either.
And how will it look like when this transformation is to happen?
In transportation, it's relatively straightforward for quite a large amount of the emissions. It is about changing from current fuels to more sustainable fuels, and actually most of these technologies are already there, but require quite some investments in our infrastructure to actually happen, whether it is the last mile of the infrastructure to electronic vehicles or more in the backbone of our electricity systems. On agriculture, which I think is the more exciting space also for startups, and where we have a long Danish tradition of being a country that are reinventing how to do agriculture globally over the last 150 years. We need to look into everything from urban farming, vertical farming, plant-based farming, but also a lot of changed consumer trends. And this is where small startups can contribute with nudging, change the consumer behaviors and so on.
Okay, so let's visualize the success. Ahlers, can you describe this world, the ecosystem of the newly transformed world of sustainable business?
Yeah, I just want to start, with the starting point as well. I think it's super important that both us as individual businesses and on the political level remember to be extremely consistent when we talk about climate, and there are kind of three levels to it. The first level is we are fucked, right? We are fucking the planet, and we continue to fuck the planet, right? And the second one is we need to change everything. But the third is, and that's also what Marianne is talking about, we can actually, by doing number two, we can create a better world, right? Everything that we can, products, systems, everything in the new world is better than what we have today. And we keep on forgetting that when we talk about this, because we only talk about one, not wholeheartedly, then we talk a bit about two, but that's a dangerous subject because I need to tell people that change their job, start taxing something, right? So we never get to number three. And who wants to live in a world where it's like, it's a sour world where we are fucked and I need to change, but I cannot see something better, right?
So let's talk about number three. What do you envision?
Number three is we eat better food, right? It's more healthy and it's not damaging the planet because it doesn't come from animals, right? That's number one, right?
Sounds good.
Our transportation, right? My car doesn't pollute in the local environment. Not the climate, of course, but not the local environment. It goes from 0 to 100 in 3.1 seconds, and it has a big screen, right? That's a better world as well.
And no noise.
What?
And no noise.
And no noise, right? So, and you can just take step from step, right? My clothes, 10 years from now, did not harm the planet when produced, and it doesn't need to wash it that often because it has some antibacterial functions in it, right? Because it's baked in, because the way we kind of co-created with nature. So all the products that we're consuming in our everyday life becomes better. It might also be in our personal life where we understand nature a bit better, right? So we experience things in a different way to be a bit more holistic as well, right? So it's not only about consuming stuff. And that's the world that we need to imagine. all of us, and therefore you need to ask yourself, am I actually help building that world? Or am I just preserving the old world? Because if you're just preserving the old world, then you're not relevant 5 to 10 years from now.
So in this future, where do you put your money?
I only put it in the future, right? But I also, sadly, start putting my money more and more in adaptation, right? Because a lot of things we talk about here is mitigation, right? Where we stop polluting. But I also need to start putting my money in investments that, help prepare the world for the changes that we're seeing already now. So any company that's working on climate data to tell a company exactly how their assets on my own house is getting affected by changing weather and more extreme weather. An interesting business opportunity, but we also need to have it. We need to have crops that can sustain 3 months drought and 3 months rain, right? Pretty much what we had in Denmark this year, right? So unfortunately, we also need to start investing in adaptation because we didn't invest enough in mitigation 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when we saw the writing on the wall.
So what do you need startups to do to be a part of that future?
I need startups to stop thinking that software can fix the world, right? That's the old Mark Andreessen quote to say that software is eating the world. That's right, and we have seen that. That has happened, right? But software is not saving the world because software is in a virtual world and all the damage we're doing is in the physical world. So anyone that has a startup needs to also explain what are you doing to change the physical world, and that happens through science. So it's these science-based startups that are producing new food, new materials, new ways of transportation, new forms of energy. Those are the ones that we need to the forefront now, combined with software, right? So I wouldn't invest in any deep tech startup that didn't use AI, for instance, right? So software is almost like a hygiene factor in many of these companies. You need to use it, but the end product is a physical product that saves the world.
But
so
would
Andreas,
you call AI for software?
What?
Yeah.
But would you call AI for software?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So AI is a broad term.
Yeah.
I know
Indeed,
yeah.
yes.
But in the CBS, in the business school, do you remember to tell your students that they really need to hook up with someone within natural sciences or technical sciences?
Well, of course, we tell the students, if you really want to change something, you need to partner, right? This is, if you want to move things in the sustainability sphere, you need to partner. Collaboration is everything because just business knowledge will not get you where you want to go. And I think in terms of envisioning a future, I would start with the individual because at the end of the day, we are talking about the change of individual behavior. So what we actually need is smarter regulation. At the moment, we really regulate the big companies and we regulate the output, the reporting, the transparency. But this is actually not really that helpful. What we need to do is we need to empower citizens through regulation. For instance, by really curbing greenwashing so that people get trust, for instance, in purchasing decisions again. This will change behavior. So in this sense, I think we do too little on the regulatory front. We are too focused on the big corporations and we do not get the regulations right because we look at the output but not at the input of sustainable change.
In this already transformed sustainable world that we're envisioning now, how does regulation look? What kind of regulation do we live by?
I think it would be regulation that is more reflexive, in a sense, that is more adaptable, and that aims more at the individual behavior instead of kind of the behavior of big corporations. Because this is, of course, important. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for the EU taxonomy and all these kind of things, but they are, on the other hand, also a big bureaucratic burden, and they will not move us to a more sustainable future. What we need is individual behavioral change, and we can incentivize this through regulation.
Right. Tommy Ahlers, you once ran for politics, right? What do you think about this program if you ran tomorrow? I tell you, all you have to change your individual behavior, and the state will regulate it.
I didn't say that.
So who's going to regulate it if not the state?
You nudge people, right? I'm not saying, we regulate individual behavior, but you nudge people, you change default rules, and you provide the infrastructure in which people can actually make decisions.
Is this going to be popular? Yeah.
No, I would run on a program, say, let's create some climate billionaires. That would be my program, to admit that it's, And the way to do that from a political point of view is not to detailed regulate what technology we believe in. It's a carbon tax. A carbon tax with no exceptions. No exceptions for Aalborg Portland. No exceptions for farming. Carbon tax, all industries, country by country. You'll never get it globally if some countries are not leading this and we start doing it. Okay. So you start country by country in the European Union to do it, and then you do the carbon border adjustment, that you put it on as a tax or a custom at the borders of Europe.
Can we have a quick vote? Is this a good idea? Okay, 50-50, so yeah. Marianne?
Just need to point to that I'm pro the carbon tax, but the issue and why it's not happening by itself is that within the different value chains, and this will be a little long, but bear with me. If you are producing a car completely carbon free, it will be roughly 4% more expensive than it is today. It's nothing. The value will be taken in that first level, a highest level of that value chain. The issue is that the carbon emission comes from the steel production, which is one producer at the bottom of that value chain. For those, they would have to have 150% higher cost to do their part of it. So they cannot do the transformation without some kind of either help, not just regulation. You can put any carbon tax on them and then they close, and the consumers will definitely not like it. So the issue is that where the value is coming in the value chain is at the forefront. Where the issue lies and the transformation need to happen is at the bottom. It's the cement producers, it's the steel producers, it's agriculture. So it's down at the primary industries you have the real issue, and you have the real value and the high margins in the top of the value chain. That's also why the companies that were at the forefront of sustainability, it was software companies, it was consumer products companies, etc., etc. And I would say, nice and good, and someone needs to start, but it was also damn easy. Because it's such a small part of their primary scope that were the CO2 emissions. Whereas the companies down here, it's not because they are evil or bad, it's just because they sit with a real issue. And that is what I think we need to find solutions to.
But Marianne, the world needs steel, right?
Yeah.
So you could not produce a lot of the things we're using, you could not produce without steel. So if it was, and now I'm dreaming, a global carbon tax, then it would work, right?
Exactly.
Right?
And I'm pro. I'm completely pro.
But and there, of course, I don't mind to see business dying if they're not into the future. That's what's happening every day, right?
Yeah.
A lot of businesses are dying every day because they're not going into the future. Now we suddenly have a debate when it comes to climate, where it feels like we're taking responsibility on the forefront because we put a target as societies, right?
Yeah.
But with digitalization, we didn't have those targets. And yet digitalization has changed entire industries over the last 20 years, and no one is crying. Because what happened? We created a better world with more jobs, right? Even the banks, where you don't have tellers sitting out in the branches anymore, they got a new job because then we regulated and have know your customers and stuff like that, right? So we have more people working in the financial sector, even though we don't have branches anymore, right? So there's a lot of things happening that is a developing world happening every day. We should believe in that when it comes to the climate change.
So you're dreaming of global taxes, and of course that even though we allowed ourselves to dream, that might be a rather hypothetical, right? but for decades we have in Denmark talked about the troublesome being a small country and being able to make this kind of regulation just within Denmark, and we've dreamt about European regulation, and now we're actually getting it. There are quite a lot of European regulation concerning sustainability and reporting and so on and so on. Is this going to lift sustainable startups, or is it going to be bureaucratic stop for them?
Both. It will. I mean, it lifts really what is happening, and I'm seeing it. I talk to a lot of companies on this. It lifts really what is happening in companies around sustainability. And let me say so, not just in compliance terms. It has important internal governance effect. I was recently talking to a company. They said, look, we do our taxonomy work. This is the first time ever that the sustainability unit and the finance unit actually talk to each other.
Yeah.
And they had a very tough time talking to each other. But this is, I think these are the positive effects on the big corporations. But there are kick-on effects. We know this from research on smaller companies. So I think it will incentivize quite a lot of sustainability work in smaller companies because, for instance, the new CSRD and the associated reporting framework, they require an analysis of the entire value chain. So with this, of course, small companies are indirectly in scope as well. So I think we are doing a good job in terms of regulation, but as I said in the beginning, this is not enough because it looks mostly at the output. And most of the indicators that are in the frameworks are backward-looking indicators. And this is a huge problem. You know, if you only look backwards, how do you manage? If you only look backwards, you want to look forward. We want to know about climate risk, biodiversity risks, social risks, health risks. But these things are not necessarily in the reporting frameworks.
Right.
So that's why split assessment from my side.
Okay, so let's leave the regulation for a while and maybe look at the nature of the startups that are needed for this future we just envisioned together.
Yeah.
Because you talked a little bit about it, Marianne. It's not enough to just do coding anymore. So what is actually needed?
No, but compared to, and Tommy also talked about it, compared to when we had the digital revolution 10 years ago, startups were all about coding and to driving for global scale as fast as possible. It was a quite easy business model to jump into. It's one skill. Now I'm exaggerating, but it was one skill and it was one business model. Today, to solve the sustainability issues of the world, you need to be multidisciplinary. There is always a physical element into it, whether it's food, transportation, furniture, clothing, energy system, it becomes physical. And by that, it is a need for both science, engineering, chemists, biologists, all of these more nature science capabilities put together with the digital capabilities. So it's multidisciplinary. And scale matters much more and is much harder to reach. So the startups also need to work more closely with established companies than the tech startups did. So far more complex because of the required skills, and far more complex because scale is harder to reach and need this partnership between established companies and startups. But it also is happening. We had the BCG Green Startup Cup last year, and we have it again this year. And all of the startups that made it to the semi-final, I was actually quite amazed to see they already had well-established partnerships with Maersk, with Novozymes, with Nykredit, or some other larger Danish companies already when they were at a very early stage.
So do you agree, Tommy Ahlers, are they actually forced to hook up with the large companies to make it?
Yes, I think so. You know, because in the digital world, we had a lot of these corporate venture, the CVCs, right? Corporate venture capitalists, right? And a lot of innovation happening and accelerators. And the digital world, the digital startup world realized they don't need the corporates. So they were not successful.
Yeah.
It will not be the same this time around because they will realize that they do need them. Because the complexity of what they're going to build, they need the one with 20 years experience on understanding this little part of a supply chain. Because in the physical world, there are laws of physics, right?
Nice.
That's why we call it the physical world, right? And it's very different from the virtual world where basically no laws, right?
Yeah.
So yes, they need them differently, right? But not all the way, right? We also still need startups that completely ignore the existing industry and provoke them and show them that it's possible to create a competitor to them. That's how you change industries.
Yeah.
That's what Elon Musk is doing with Tesla. Imagine that he licensed out his battery platform to Volkswagen and BMW. We'll not have 15% of all cars sold in the world being EVs. But we have that now. Why? He showed them that he's a real threat to them, a real competitor, and we need that to happen within other parts, all industries, to show that it's possible to do green cement, and then they need to change because otherwise they die. That's why I think we start getting real change.
And of course, Elon Musk had the nice thing that he had the money in his pocket almost by himself, or at least he had a especially fortunate platform to raise money.
But we have a lot of, look, we are here in Denmark, we have one of the biggest business foundations, right? The Novo Nordisk Foundation. Based their money on science, right? All their money comes from science, right? Because it's life science. And that money, they are prepared to invest in this. So if the entrepreneurs dare to go into this much more complicated world, the money is there. And actually there's more money for that than there ever was for the digital startup, definitely here in Denmark, right? Yeah. Okay. So now you don't have, as a startup in Denmark, you don't have to dream about that Sequoia will come and invest in you. No, you just go to Hellerup and talk to Novo Nordisk Foundation, right? I'm not promised they will invest in all your startups, but many of them, right? So we actually have an advantage in the Danish financial investor ecosystem compared to some parts of in the US, right? And we need to leverage that.
Yeah. So how do you view this, Andreas, Rasche? You talked about the market being a little more reluctant these days, actually, towards the sustainable investments than like in the happy days just a few years ago.
Yes, I mean, if you look at the overall market for sustainable investing, this has slowed down in recent months. The so-called ESG movement, right?
And is this good or bad in your view?
From my perspective, this is good. And I'm not saying this, because I want to prevent sustainable investment, but because there was a hype in the market, there was a bubble in the market, and there was kind of less substance. A lot of funds were simply rebranded. They suddenly appeared as ESG funds, and this is what I call greenwashing, right? And this is what I was saying, if I go to a bank and I want to publish a fund, I want to know it is an ESG fund, and I don't want to be betrayed by my bank. So, and this is where regulation kicks in. What I was saying in the beginning, we need to regulate for citizens to make informed decisions. Another big reason for this kind of sustainable investing movement slowing down is in the US, the culture wars, Republicans and Democrats not really getting along on the sustainability issues, quite tough fights. But I think what is good is that impact investing hasn't slowed as much. So impact investing, and this is where I would put my cards in terms of really changing things. This is where we see quite a lot of action still, and I think and I hope that we will move from the ESG world a little bit more over to the impact investing world, because this is where the action is.
I actually hate the word impact investing.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because it's just investing, right? No,
it's just investing. Exactly.
I've talked to investors, and then they say, "Oh, you're doing a climate startup. Go and talk to the impact department." Yeah. No, I want to talk to the other department that will evaluate my business on the same terms as any other business, because that's where we need to go. Otherwise, we're not building economically sustainable businesses, right?
I'm fully with Tommy. I also really hate the word, because any good investment is taking risk factors into account. And of course, if you are investing in something that are non-sustainable, then you're having a very high risk profile. So it's a very bad investment. So it's just the investment department, not the impact investment
I would
department.
fully agree with you. I don't care much about labels as long as the investment happens, right?
No, exactly. No, but I think it becomes an excuse.
There is no impact investment department, then it will happen.
To be, and they have to see the writing on the wall that there's money to be made.
Yeah.
Hence my point, I would run on a platform saying, let's create some climate billionaires, because you can both save the world and become a billionaire. Yeah. Elon Musk, right? It's possible to do this, and we can actually create here in
But I would even go so far to say you can only become a billionaire if you save the world, because if you are not, then you are running with too high a risk profile and no one will invest in your company.
But you advise big companies, Marianne, in the Boston Consulting Group. How, without naming anyone or shaming anyone, how close are they, do you think, to see this truth? Do they realize that they will not be there tomorrow if they don't really transform?
Yeah, I think all of the large enterprises for sure know that this is top of their risk agenda. All of the boards and the executive teams understand that this is what they need to solve to be in business in 10 or 20 years. I would, however, also say that in Europe, I can get a little frustrated because the time from realizing that to action is a little long. Whereas in US, it might be that it took a little longer to realize that now was now. But the US corporate tradition is much more than when you have realized there is a risk, then you act. And we can see it also at a societal level. 5 years ago, US were nowhere in sustainability investments. Now they are far, far beyond us. China is far, far beyond us. And Europe continue. We were ahead. We had a competitive advantage and a competitive edge in many industries. And I'm afraid we're going to lose it.
How is it going to rub off the whole democratic division in the US? How is it going to rub off on business, do you think? Are we going to feel the anti-ESG wave also in Europe?
I think we need to separate ES and G. I think there is some of the diversity discussions you can get more value-based around, and I think there we will have an increasing conflict level, to be honest, and much more values will come into play with more subcultures of different varieties. Whereas on climate, I actually do believe that the companies will push it through, because otherwise it will be bad investments and their capital cost will be too high.
Okay, even if we have Republican persons running for president who just call the climate a hoax?
Oh, no, now we're at the company level.
Yeah.
I will not be... I will leave the politician analysis.
Right. So maybe do you envision that the politicians quarrel to rub off in the business level, Andreas?
Oh my God, politicians! I mean, it's. Don't make me talk about politicians. I mean, sorry, Tommy, but it's. I wanted to get back to the question around, does it rub off on Europe? Yes, it does, to some degree at least. We see, for instance, slowed down support for shareholder resolutions on the ESG front. We've seen BlackRock changing voting behavior. We've seen Vanguard changing voting behavior. I know this is at a very high level, but we see it. But let's not forget, when the taxonomy was developed, we had similar political fights. Should nuclear and gas be included? And there was a big fight around it, right? So we shouldn't be afraid to have values and to express these. The problem in the US is that this actually very much gets into the way of sustainability, whereas here in Europe we have I would say a tradition to resolve these things and to come up with solutions, political solutions that then actually work.
So you're an optimist on that?
No,
yeah?
I think it's a very, very good point, because the climate agenda is not just going to happen by itself, right? It does require leadership, right? Where you say, I believe in this both as a political leader and as a company leader. And then no matter what, you believe that this is the right thing to do. And then you might be hurt on your profitability, right? What Christian Hansen didn't want to do, right? They took the easy route and say, no, this is business. And they forgot their integrity and threw that under the bus. And we do see examples in the financial sector in the US now where they have a new expression called greenwashing, right? It's not greenwashing, it's greenwashing, because they do the right thing, invest in green stuff, but they don't tell their investors, because they know that some of these investors are so deeply ingrained in the political environment in the US, so they are afraid to be called out, because now some pension funds that are close to the Republican Party are saying, if you invest in anything green, we don't want to put our money with you anymore, right? So it is changing, and the only thing we can, what we can do here is political leaders, and then start doing what they're actually doing in the US now. And therefore, I'm not afraid that it will hurt the business in the US, because they have seen that it's possible to create many jobs with this. So the Inflation Reduction Act that is pulling in, some people estimate it's 600 billion billion US dollars into companies like some of you are building, if you were building this in the US market. That are creating so many jobs, so that becomes a political victory in itself. So, and that is, I think, we're lacking to realize in Europe, that we can actually create, with this green economy, we can actually use that as to create new big companies, new big industry companies that are not only hiring people like us in the room here today, but blue-collar workers.
And I think that is what we need to change, that sentiment, and it is also changing in reality. It's not this green versus red. We had a prime minister who said it actually goes hand in hand. There is only job creation, and by that welfare creation, when you're going green. So this is not an opposite. It is, and you could put blue into the mix also. There is no good business without. So there is not really any conflict here, but it's because it's representing some underlying values, and that's where I think there is a value and a norming conflict that are increasing in our part of the world and in US. But the red versus blue versus green is like an old conversation. They go hand in hand. There is no conflict.
But it's a new versus old conversation. We just had a conversation out here before we entered the stage, saying it becomes harder and harder to paint a positive picture of the future when everyone is well off. And look around this country. Everyone is kind of well off, right? Everyone has nice salaries and nice jobs.
Why should I want to change my life?
Why should I want to change? Whereas if you are in a part of the world where a lot of people don't have the job yet, right? Don't have a well-functioning healthcare sector or education, right? There you can easily become visionary and say, we want to go over here. And those countries, they might become greener that we are, because they could just circumvent.
Yeah.
They would never, the whole notion that someone going into the middle class in Nigeria or China will start eating meat, I don't believe in that. Because they will have the new products that we might develop, and they never get into the tradition of eating meat, because meat is bad for so many reasons, right? So they just go straight to another, fermented or cell-based, lab-grown product.
It's the same with the IT infrastructure in some African countries.
Exactly.
It is really, really good, because they never had landlines.
Exactly.
They moved straight into cellular.
Yeah.
And we thought it was so brilliant when we got mobile pay in Denmark.
Yeah.
And then when you went to South Africa,
Exactly.
they're like, what? We had M-Pay for like 10 years. And we're
Exactly.
like, yeah, great innovation.
Exactly.
Okay.
They never had credit cards, right?
So we only have a few minutes left here, and I just have one question for each of you. And maybe I'll start with you, Tommy. Which startup would you love to start today yourself?
A startup that would do food material based on biology, where I would be certain that it's no more research, but we could start building a factory in 2 years' time from now. That startup, I'm actively looking for startups like that. I think they're out there, and I'm sure that I'm convinced that I can invest in them and connect them to the money from these family funds in Denmark. That's the company I would invest in.
Okay. You're invited. Yep.
But in 2 years, not in 5 years or in 10 years. We want to have impact now, and therefore we want to start building factories.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, like I'm in a cartoon when I say factories, like I didn't understand. No, I understand what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a physical factory with steel tanks that are producing millions of units every day, because that's how we're getting impact. Stop talking.
Yeah.
Great. And I'll do ladies last. So Andreas, what education would you like to take today if you started over?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I mean, I became a scientist by accident, I must say. I actually wanted to become a gardener, and ended up in science. I think I would probably choose something that is really multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, because the problems that we are facing, they are interdisciplinary as well, right? So I think we always, and this is I think where our education system is absolutely not built in the right way, because we think too much in silos, we think too much in degrees. Other countries are better, where you can actually have multiple majors and you can try out yourself a little bit more. So for me, this kind of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary aspect would play a big role. And second, I would try to become a lifelong learner, because I think knowledge is moving so fast. What we discussed here, we would have probably had a totally different discussion 12 months ago. So in this sense, knowledge is moving fast, and we cannot just run the model to study 4 or 5 years and then work for 45 years. This just doesn't fit into this world. So I would personally make sure, that whatever I do, I will constantly upgrade my knowledge.
Great. Well, that gives me hope for my daughter, who is now studying to be a plumber, after studying literary science and climate science.
Cool.
I love it. Yes.
Right?
Something with water, yeah.
Physical impact.
I hope so. Well, Marianne, you get the last one. Which advice would you give to companies if they really want to be part of a sustainable future?
I think I will end where Tommy started. It is about, we need to change the narrative about sustainable transformation of either it's our companies or our societies, from being led from a burning platform to be a burning desire. It has proven to not really give the impact of change of behavior, either at societal, individual or company level, to take that burning platform approach. So it needs to be a burning desire on how we're going to imagine that great future.
Okay. Well, we'll see you all in the sustainable future, and please give this panel a hand.